Eleanor Whitaker placed the rejection money back into that man's hand without a single tremor in her fingers, and every soul on that Montana platform went dead quiet, because not one of them had expected a woman they'd already decided was worthless to have that kind of spine. If you have ever been told you were too much and still chose to stand, subscribe to this channel right now, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, and drop the name of your city in the comments below, so I can see exactly how far this story has already traveled. Now let's go back to that train platform and find out what happened next. Montana Territory, August 1884. The train arrived 12 minutes late, and in those 12 minutes, the crowd gathered at the Harlan Creek station had already decided everything they needed to know about the woman on board. They knew her name, Eleanor Whitaker, 27 years old, from a small farm outside Dayton, Ohio. A mail-order bride who had answered an advertisement placed by Caleb Thornton's business partner, a man named Gerald Fitch, on behalf of the wealthiest ranch owner in the entire Northern Territory. They knew the arrangement: a formal correspondence, 8 months of letters, a signed agreement, a train ticket paid in full. What they did not know, what none of them had bothered to consider, was that the woman stepping off that train had buried her father 6 months ago, watched the family farm get sold off to cover debts. She had not packed everything she owned into a single brown suitcase, and traveled 2,000 miles on the belief that one man's written word still meant something in this world. But the crowd at Harlan Creek was not there to consider any of that. They were there to watch. Martha Griggs pressed close to her neighbor, Agnes Beaumont, near the water barrel, and lowered her voice just enough to be heard by everyone nearby. Gerald Fitch told my husband the letters didn't exactly describe her accurately. Agnes tilted her head. Meaning what? Meaning she's a large woman. Martha folded her hands primly in front of her apron. Larger than the letter said. Gerald found out from her Ohio County records when he sent the final confirmation papers. Agnes made a sound in her throat like she was passing judgment from a great height. All this way, my lord. The poor man had no idea. Martha shook her head with the kind of sympathy that carried no kindness in it at all. Caleb Thornton is a fine-looking man. He deserves a wife suited to his station. Nobody said anything to challenge that. Nobody looked uncomfortable. Nobody suggested that Eleanor Whitaker, after 2,000 miles and 8 months of hope, deserved to be talked about as something other than a disappointment that hadn't quite arrived yet. The train whistle cut across the platform. The crowd shifted forward. The door of the passenger car opened and Eleanor stepped out. She was not a small woman. That was the first thing people registered, and it was the only thing most of them held on to after. She was tall and full-figured, with strong hands and a steady gaze, and brown hair pinned back under a traveling hat that had seen better years. Her dress was clean and pressed despite the journey. Her boots were worn but polished. She carried her suitcase in her right hand and held the railing with her left, and she stepped down from that train the way a woman steps into a room she has already decided she has every right to enter. She looked at the crowd looked back, and then the whispers started, not quietly. Lord, she is big. Gerald Fitch is going to have something to answer for. She'll never manage a mountain ranch. Look at her. Poor Caleb. Eleanor heard every word. She had spent 27 years learning how to keep her face composed while the world expressed its disappointment in her body. She was practiced at it. She was fluent in it. She set her suitcase down at her feet, lifted her chin, and looked across the platform for the man whose handwriting she had memorized over 8 months of correspondence. She did not see him. What she saw instead was Gerald Fitch walking toward her with his jaw set and his eyes fixed somewhere slightly above her head, as though he was conducting a business transaction that had turned unpleasant, and the fastest way through it was to not look directly at the problem. He stopped 2 feet away from her. "Miss Whitaker," he said. "Mr. Fitch," she said. He cleared his throat. "I'll come directly to the point, as I think that's the most decent way to handle this. Mr. Thornton has given the arrangement further consideration and has determined that the circumstances have changed since the original correspondence was drafted. He has asked me to convey his regrets and to offer you return travel compensation." He produced a small white envelope from his breast pocket and held it toward her. This should cover your train fare back to Ohio and expenses for a week's lodging while you make arrangements." Eleanor stared at the envelope. She did not take it. "Where is Mr. Thornton?" she said. Gerald's jaw tightened. "He asked me to handle this on his behalf." "That is not what I asked you." "Miss Whitaker, I asked where he is." Her voice did not rise. It did not shake. It simply became more precise. "I have been corresponding with that man for 8 months. He sent me a signed agreement. He sent me a train ticket with his name on the letterhead. I would like to speak with him directly. That is not possible at this time." "Then I will wait until it is possible." Gerald Fitch blinked. That had not been the expected response. The expected response was tears or embarrassment, or the quiet acceptance of the envelope and a quick retreat from the platform before the crowd got too much to bear. He had prepared for grief. He had not prepared for patience weaponized. "Miss Whitaker," he said, dropping his voice, "I think you understand the nature of the situation. Mr. Thornton is a man of considerable standing in this community. The arrangement was made in good faith, but certain information has come to light that—" "What information?" she said. He stopped. "What information," she repeated, "has come to light?" The crowd had gone very quiet. Not out of respect. Out of the particular fascination that comes from watching someone refuse to perform the role they've been assigned. Gerald Fitch looked at the envelope in his extended hand. He looked at Eleanor. He made a calculation about the path of least resistance and chose incorrectly. "Your correspondence was not entirely forthcoming," he said, "regarding your physical presentation." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured and even, and carried to every corner of that platform without her having to raise it at all. "I see," she said. "You're telling me that Caleb Thornton entered into a formal written agreement with a woman he chose based on her character, her capabilities, and 8 months of honest correspondence, and he is breaking that agreement because I am larger than he imagined." Gerald shifted his weight. "The situation is more nuanced then." "Take your envelope back," Eleanor said. She looked at it. She looked at him. And then she reached out and placed the envelope back into his hand with a steadiness that silenced the entire crowd. "I traveled across this country as a woman who believed your words," she said. "Not as something you can return when you change your mind. Mr. Thornton wrote to me about respect and partnership and the value of a capable woman. I would like him to explain to my face why those words no longer apply." The silence that fell over Harlan Creek Station was the kind that happens when a crowd expects humiliation and gets dignity instead and doesn't quite know what to do with the difference. Martha Griggs opened her mouth. She did not say anything. Agnes Beaumont looked at her boots. Gerald Fitch stood with the envelope in his hand and the particular expression of a man who has underestimated someone and is only now becoming aware of the full scope of his mistake. And then a voice came from the back of the crowd. Deep. Unhurried. With the particular quiet authority of a man who is used to being heard without having to shout. "She's not leaving." The crowd parted. Not quickly. Not dramatically. The way water moves when something solid and immovable passes through it. Caleb Thornton walked forward. How was not what Eleanor had expected. She had constructed a version of him from his letters, thoughtful, precise with a formality she had found both reassuring and slightly stiff. She had imagined someone polished, someone who matched the wealth his letters described. The man walking toward her was none of those things. How was tall, broad-shouldered, with the weathered look of a man who had built everything he owned with his physical body and had the hands to prove it. His coat was good quality, but worn without ceremony. His hat was pushed back slightly, and he moved with the easy, unhurried confidence of someone who had spent years being the most capable person in any room and had stopped feeling the need to announce it. He stopped beside Eleanor, not in front of her, not between her and Gerald Fitch like a shield, beside her at the same level facing the same direction. And the meaning of that was not lost on anyone watching. "Caleb," Gerald said tightly. "We discussed—" "Gerald." Caleb's voice was quiet and absolute. "We're done discussing. The arrangement is none of your business anymore." Caleb looked at him steadily. "You were asked to send a message, not to make decisions, not to offer money, Not to stand on my platform and speak on my behalf about things you were never authorized to resolve." Gerald's face flushed dark red. "You told me—" "I told you to let her know I would be delayed," Caleb said. "I did not tell you to end the arrangement. That was your initiative." The crowd murmured. Gerald stared at him. "Caleb, look at her. You can't honestly—" "I'm going to stop you right there," Caleb said. Not loudly, not with heat, with the calm finality of a man closing a door. "Because whatever you are about to say next is something you will regret saying in front of witnesses, and I would rather not have to fire you publicly if I can help it." The murmuring from the crowd shifted in register. Gerald Fitch looked at Eleanor. He looked at Caleb. He put the envelope back in his pocket. He turned around and walked off the platform, and the crowd watched him go with the collective awareness that something significant had just shifted. Caleb turned to Eleanor. She was watching him with the careful, composed expression of someone who had been surprised, but was not yet willing to show it. "Miss Whitaker," he said. "Mr. Thornton," she said. "I owe you an apology." "You owe me an explanation," she said. "Save the apology until after I understand what you're explaining." Something crossed his face. It might have been surprise. It might have been the early edge of respect. He reached up and removed his hat, holding it at his side. "I got cold feet," he said. "When Gerald sent the final papers and mentioned you were a larger woman than the letter suggested. I let doubt get the better of me for about 48 hours. I sent him a message asking him to postpone the arrival. He took that further than I intended." 48 hours of doubt, Eleanor said, "and 8 months of correspondence." "Yes, ma'am. You wrote me about partnership," she said. "You wrote me that the qualities you valued in a wife were patience, capability, and honesty. You wrote those words, Mr. Thornton. I have the letters." "I know." "Did you mean them?" He held her gaze without flinching. "Yes." "Then I would like to understand how 48 hours of doubt about my physical appearance became sufficient reason to send a man to this platform with an envelope and no decency." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Around them, the crowd had not dispersed. Nobody was leaving. The spectacle had transformed into something they couldn't quite categorize, and human nature being what it is, they stayed to see where it ended. "It wasn't my finest moment," Caleb said finally. "I won't dress it up as something it wasn't." "That," Eleanor said, "is the most honest thing anyone has said to me today." He studied her for a long moment. She stood there and let him. Not with performance. Not with the particular self-conscious posture of someone waiting to be assessed and found acceptable. Just standing in the late afternoon light of an August afternoon with her suitcase at her feet and her eyes level with his, as straightforward and unashamed as a woman could be. "I would like to start over," he said. "If that's possible." "Possibly," she said. "But first tell me one thing." "All right. The letter you sent last November," she said. "When you wrote about your parents and the ranch and the years after you lost them. Was that honest or was that performance?" Something shifted in his face. Not pain exactly. Something older than pain. "That was the most honest letter I ever wrote," he said. "Then I would like to stay," Eleanor said. "Not permanently, not yet, but I am not getting back on that train today, and I am not accepting that envelope. I will give you 3 months to show me whether the man in those letters is real, and you will give me 3 months to show you the same." Caleb Thornton looked at the woman standing in front of him. The woman his partner had tried to send away the woman. This crowd had already written off the woman who had put his money back in his hand and told him exactly who she was, without apologizing for a single inch of it. He put his hat back on. 3 months, he said. 3 months, she agreed. He reached down and picked up her suitcase. "Then let me show you the ranch," he said. And just like that, in front of every person who had gathered to watch Eleanor Whitaker's humiliation, Caleb Thornton walked off that platform carrying her bag. Not behind her, not in front of her, beside her, at the same pace heading in the same direction. Martha Griggs made a small strangled sound. Agnes Beaumont said nothing at all. The crowd stood there on the platform in the fading afternoon light, watching the wealthiest man in northern Montana walk beside a woman they had decided wasn't enough, and trying to make sense of the particular kind of foolishness they had just witnessed in themselves. The ride out to the Thornton Ranch took nearly 2 hours on a road that climbed steadily through pine and open meadow into the mountain country that gave the region its particular character. Caleb drove. Eleanor sat beside him on the bench seat of a wagon that was practical rather than showy, loaded in the back with supplies from the general store that had apparently been waiting for the day's collection. They did not speak much in the first hour. Eleanor watched the landscape. Caleb kept his eyes on the road, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It had the quality of two people who were each privately recalibrating, adjusting the image they had carried for 8 months against the reality now sitting beside them. "Your letters mentioned you had a housekeeper," Eleanor said eventually. "Mrs. Taggart. She left in April. Her sister took ill. And since April, the men manage well enough." Eleanor looked at him. "Ranch hands are managing the household. They eat, they sleep. The house is still standing." "Mr. Thornton." "Caleb." She paused. "Caleb, I am going to ask you a question, and I would like an honest answer." "That seems to be the only kind you're interested in," he said. "How bad is it?" I was quiet for a moment. "Bad enough," he said finally. She nodded. She looked back at the road ahead. "All right," she said simply. When they arrived, she understood what he meant. The house itself was impressive in scale, a large timber structure built into the hillside with a wide covered porch and windows that looked out over the valley below. It had been built by someone who intended permanence, someone who had imagined a family filling it. But the inside told a different story. The kitchen was functional in the way a barn is functional, sufficient, organized by men with no investment in comfort, stripped of anything that wasn't strictly necessary. The main room was clean but cold. The shelves in the pantry were organized with the particular aggressive efficiency of someone who knows where everything is but cannot explain why anyone would care. There were no curtains in the dining room. The stove needed blacking. The floor needed more than sweeping. The ranch hands watched her walk through the house with the guarded expressions of men who had not expected to be living with a woman and weren't yet sure how they felt about the adjustment. Caleb introduced them. 5 men in total. Tom Briggs, the senior hand, a 40-year-old with forearms like fence posts and the cautious eyes of someone who had seen new situations go wrong before. Danny Cowell, young and red-haired and visibly uncertain about whether he was supposed to remove his hat or not. 3 others, Pike Harlan Rubin, who watched from a respectful distance with identical expressions of reserved assessment. "Tom," Eleanor said. Tom Briggs looked at her steadily. "Ma'am, I understand you've been managing the house along with the ranch work since April." "We've gotten along." "I can see that," she said. "You've done a fair job of keeping things from becoming a genuine disaster. That tells me you're capable. Now I'd like to understand what the biggest problems are, because I'd rather fix what's broken than impose a system onto something that just needs adjustment." Tom Briggs blinked. He had expected something else. Instructions, maybe. Or complaints. Or the particular exhausting gentility of a woman who found everything slightly inadequate but lacked the vocabulary to say so directly. "The kitchen stove loses heat in the back left corner," he said, testing. "Makes baking unreliable. Mrs. Taggart always said she'd ask about getting it replaced but never did. Is there a local blacksmith who works with cast iron? Jensen in town. He's good. I'll need him out here within the week." She looked at the shelf arrangement in the pantry. "Who organized these supplies?" "That would be Danny," Tom said. Danny Cowell straightened as though he'd been called to account. "It's logical," Eleanor said, studying the arrangement. "You grouped by container size rather than by how often things are used. It makes sense as a system, but you'll spend twice as long finding what you need 3 times a day." She looked at Danny. "Are you willing to learn a different system?" Danny blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. We'll do that tomorrow morning." She moved through the rest of the house with that same direct efficiency, not finding fault, but simply observing, asking questions, and processing the answers with the focused attention of someone building a clear picture rather than cataloging grievances. Caleb watched her. He stood in the doorway of the main room and watched Eleanor Whitaker move through the shell of a house that had functioned for years without warmth, and he felt something he did not have a clean word for. Not attraction exactly, though that was beginning to be present. Something older and more fundamental. The feeling of watching someone be precisely what a situation required without having been told what that was. Tom Briggs appeared at Caleb's elbow. "She's not what I expected," Tom said quietly. "No," Caleb agreed. "Gerald Fitch said she wouldn't last a week." "Gerald Fitch is going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with me tomorrow morning," Caleb said. Tom glanced at him sideways. "She put the money back in his hand." "I know. I saw it. The whole platform saw it. I know that too." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You made a mistake sending him down there instead of going yourself." Caleb said nothing. "Ain't my place," Tom added. "No, it isn't," Caleb said. "But you're right." Over the following days, something began to shift at the Thornton Ranch that the men couldn't quite articulate, but could all feel. It wasn't dramatic. Eleanor Whitaker did not arrive with speeches or demands or grand transformations. She worked. That was all. She rose before anyone else and had the kitchen warm and coffee ready by the time the hands came in for breakfast. The meals were better, not extravagant, but better made with the attention of someone who understood that men doing physical labor needed food that actually sustained them. She fixed the pantry system with Danny's help on the second morning, explaining her logic as she went, and Danny absorbed it with the particular focused attention of someone who respects competence regardless of where it comes from. By the end of the week, he was maintaining the system without being reminded. She asked Tom Briggs about the accounting books. Tom hesitated. "That's Caleb's area." "I know," she said. "But Caleb told me the household accounts needed attention, and I can't make sense of what I'm working with unless I understand the full picture. I'm not asking to take over his books. I'm asking to see the household portion so I can do my job properly." Tom thought about it. He brought her the household ledger. She spent an evening with it at the kitchen table after supper, a cup of coffee at her elbow and a pencil in her hand. And by the time she was done, she had identified 3 months of supply orders that had been duplicated, a recurring error in the feed calculations that was costing the ranch approximately $12 a month, and an invoice from a supplier in Billings that had been paid twice. She put a neat notation next to each one and left the ledger on the kitchen table where Caleb would find it in the morning. He found it at 5:30 in the morning when he came down before the hands were up, and he sat at that table with his coffee and read through every notation with the particular attention of a man who takes his finances seriously. When Eleanor came down at 5:55, he was still sitting there. "You found mistakes," he said. "Some of them were easy to miss," she said, moving to the stove. "These add up to nearly $60 over 3 months. 58, she said, give or take. He looked at her back as she added wood to the stove. "You went through these last night." "I wasn't sleeping particularly well." "Miss Whitaker." "Eleanor." He paused. The adjustment settled. "Eleanor," he said, "how did you learn bookkeeping?" She was quiet for a moment, measuring coffee. "My father's farm," she said. "When he started getting sick, I took over managing everything. The accounts, the suppliers, the crop planning, the debt negotiations." She added water to the pot. "We still lost the farm, but not from poor management. The debt was older than I was. There was nothing to be done about it in the end." She set the pot on the stove. "I learned a lot in those years." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry about the farm," he said. "So am I," she said simply. They were quiet together for a while. The fire caught properly, and the kitchen began to warm, and outside the mountain, morning was doing what mountain mornings did. Slowly, beautifully, without any concern for the particular struggles of the people inside watching it. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. "You can ask," Eleanor said. "I'll decide after whether to answer." That thing crossed his face again, the possible respect, the possible surprise. "Fair enough. In those letters, you wrote about what you wanted, a home, a partnership, something real." He paused. "But you never wrote about what you were afraid of." Eleanor turned from the stove and looked at him. "Neither did you," she said. He held her gaze. "No," he said. "I didn't." Then maybe we're more alike than either of us expected, she said. She turned back to the stove, and Caleb Thornton sat at his kitchen table with the corrected ledger in front of him, and the smell of coffee beginning to fill the house, and the quiet, steady presence of a woman who had come 2,000 miles to be rejected, and instead was standing in his kitchen at 6 in the morning, making something whole out of what had been broken for years. He thought about Gerald Fitch's envelope. He thought about the way Eleanor had placed it back in his hand without a tremor. I thought about every person on that platform who had looked at her and seen something insufficient. And he thought that in his 38 years of life, including the years building this ranch from nothing, including the years after his parents died, when he had told himself he was fine. Alone, he had made some significant errors in judgment, some of them costly, some of them embarrassing. The worst of them had happened 2 days ago, when he had spent 48 hours letting doubt speak louder than everything he already knew. He was not going to let that stand uncorrected, not if he could help it. The weeks passed. The ranch changed. Not all at once. Not in any way that was possible to point to and say that is the moment. But the men who had been managing with grim functional efficiency began coming to supper in clean shirts. Danny Cowell started smiling in the mornings. Tom Briggs, who had initially been the most reserved about Eleanor's presence, had taken to stopping by the kitchen after the evening work was done, and sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, not saying much, but staying. Caleb noticed all of it. He noticed it with the careful attention of a man who has spent many years alone, and has consequently become very good at seeing the texture of things, at reading the way people move, and what their movements mean. He noticed the evening Eleanor spent 3 hours on the porch with Danny Cowell, who had quietly confided that he couldn't read, and was afraid someone would find out. He watched through the window without making himself known, and saw her produce a worn primer from somewhere in her suitcase, and place it on the railing between them, and heard her say in that even, patient voice that learning to read had nothing to do with intelligence, and everything to do with opportunity, and that anyone who told him otherwise didn't know what they were talking about. He noticed the morning she walked the perimeter fence with Tom Briggs and came back with 3 pages of notes about sections that needed repair, written in the careful, organized hand he now recognized from the ledger. He noticed the evening she did not come down to supper, and when he went to check on her, he found her sitting on the floor of the small room she'd been given with her back against the bed and her hands in her lap. Not crying, just very still in the way of someone who has reached the end of a very long day and is simply putting themselves back together before anyone can see that they needed to. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. Give me, she said. I'll be down in a moment. You don't need to be anywhere, he said. I'm fine. I know you're fine, he said. Fine people are still allowed to need a minute. She looked at him for a moment. I was thinking about my father, she said. It comes up sometimes when I'm tired. I don't mean to. Don't apologize, he said. She stopped. Don't apologize for missing someone, he said. There's nothing in that needs fixing. He stayed in the doorway, not crowding her, just present. After a moment, he said, My parents died within a year of each other. After I'd built most of the main structure of the house. My father never got to see it finished. My mother saw it finished, but she wasn't well by then. He paused. I think about that sometimes. Building something for people who don't get to live in it. Eleanor was quiet. I think they'd be glad it exists, she said finally. Caleb looked at her. Yeah, he said. I think they might be. I went back downstairs and left her to her minute. But something had shifted between them in that doorway and the acknowledgement of grief shared at a distance, and both of them knew it. At the end of the second month, Eleanor found the discrepancy in the supply accounts that changed everything. She had been working through the older ledgers with Caleb's permission, given gradually as his trust in her judgment grew, organizing the records for the current year. And she found buried in 18 months of otherwise ordinary transactions a pattern: small amounts, irregular intervals, payments made to suppliers that didn't match any delivery records she could find. Invoices from a freighting company in Billings that had the right format, but slightly different letterhead from the other confirmed invoices of the same period. She checked again. Then she went to find Tom Briggs. Tom, she said. Come look at something. Tom followed her to the kitchen table and looked at the papers she'd laid out. He was quiet for a long time. That's a lot of money, he said. Over 18 months, she said. In amounts small enough not to immediately flag. Someone who knew the accounts well. Someone who knew exactly what a realistic supply cost looked like and stayed close enough to it not to draw attention. Tom looked at her. Gerald Fitch manages the supply orders. I know, Eleanor said. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Caleb needs to see this, Tom said. Yes, Eleanor said. He does. She was the one who told him. That evening at the kitchen table with the papers laid out in the same order she'd shown Tom, she walked Caleb through everything she'd found. He did not interrupt. He did not react with the explosive anger she had half expected. He sat with his elbows on the table and listened to every word, his face very still and very controlled. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. How confident are you in this? He said. Confident enough to show it to a judge, she said. But I think you should have your own man check my work before you do anything. I'm not infallible. He looked at the papers. He looked at her. Why didn't you just bring this to me without Tom? He said. Because I wanted a witness, she said. Someone who knew I hadn't manufactured any of this. Someone who could confirm the chain of what I found and how I found it. Caleb held her gaze. That's not a thing most people would think of, he said. Most people haven't had to protect themselves in situations where their word was the least trusted thing in the room, she said quietly. He was silent for a long moment. Eleanor, he said. Yes. I am going to deal with Gerald Fitch, he said, and I want you to stay. She looked at him steadily. I have 3 weeks left in the 3 months, she said. I know. He paused. I'm not asking you to decide today. I'm asking you to know that whatever comes next with Gerald, whatever gets complicated or ugly before it's resolved, I don't want you to think that changes anything about what I think of you being here. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. What do you think, she said carefully, about me being here? He looked at her across the kitchen table, with its spread of papers and its evidence of a betrayal he hadn't seen coming, and he said the truth without dressing it up. I think this house has been empty for a long time, he said, and I think you're the first person who's made it feel like it was built for something. Eleanor Whitaker looked at the man who had almost sent her home. She thought about the envelope. She thought about the platform. She thought about every voice that had told her in one form or another that she was something that needed to be returned. And she made a decision. Not today, not out loud, not yet. But she made it. Caleb did not sleep that night. Eleanor knew it the same way she had come to know most things about him over these weeks. Not because he told her, but because the house had a particular quality of silence when he was moving through it, versus when it was truly empty. And she lay in her room, listening to that silence shift and settle and shift again as he walked the main floor below, not pacing exactly, but not still either. She did not go down. She had said what needed saying. She had laid the papers on the table and walked him through every number, every discrepancy, every ghost invoice with its slightly wrong letterhead. She had done her part. What Caleb did with it now was his to carry, and she had learned early in her life that taking other people's weight away from them before they were ready to put it down only created a different kind of problem. But she did not sleep either. She stared at the ceiling of her small room and thought about Gerald Fitch. Not with anger. Anger required a kind of energy she had stopped wasting on people who had already shown her exactly who they were. She thought about him with the cool, precise attention she gave to problems that needed solving. Turning over what she knew and what she still didn't know, and what the gap between those two things might contain. Gerald Fitch had been Caleb's business partner for 7 years. He managed the suppliers, the contracts with the cattle buyers, the correspondence with the freighting companies. He knew the accounts the way a man knows a house he has lived in for years. Not just where everything is, but where the floorboards creak, where the locks stick, where a person could move without being heard. That kind of knowledge did not become a weapon overnight, which meant this had been happening for a long time. which meant Gerald Fitch had been sitting at Caleb's table and eating Caleb's food and building Caleb's trust for years while quietly draining money from the operation in amounts designed to stay invisible, which meant the man who had stood on that platform with an envelope and a cold expression, sending her away like something that could be returned, had not simply been acting on Caleb's momentary doubt. He had been protecting his position. She had threatened it simply by arriving. Eleanor sat up in her bed. If she was right, and she was increasingly certain that she was the rejected bride, story had never been about her at all. It had been Gerald Fitch calculating risk. A wife at the Thornton Ranch meant new eyes on the household, new attention to the accounts, someone who might ask questions he couldn't control. He hadn't rejected her because of her size. He had rejected her because she was competent. She got up, lit the lamp on her table, and pulled out the small notebook she kept in the top drawer of the dresser. She wrote down every thought in sequence, every connection between the pieces she'd found in the ledger, every question that still needed answering, because she had learned that the difference between a suspicion and an argument was the ability to lay it out clearly enough that someone else could follow it without your help. She worked until the lamp needed trimming. By the time gray light began coming through the window, she had 3 pages of notes and a clearer sense of what they were dealing with. She went downstairs. Caleb was at the kitchen table. He had clearly been there for hours. The lamp in the center of the table had burned low, and there were papers spread in front of him. His own copies of some of the records she'd identified, pulled from the files he kept in his office. He had a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold at his elbow, and the particular look of a man who has spent a night staring at something he didn't want to be true. He looked up when she came in. "You should have slept," he said. "So should you," she said. She moved to the stove and built the fire up properly and put the coffee on, and neither of them said anything for a few minutes. When the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups and brought them to the table and sat down across from him. "I found more," she said. He looked at her. "After you went to bed," she said. "I was thinking through it and I needed to write it down. There's a pattern in the freighting invoices that I didn't explain fully last night." She pulled out her notebook and turned it to the relevant pages. "Look at the intervals. It's not random. The fraudulent invoices appear in the same 2 weeks of every quarter, April and October. Those are the weeks when the legitimate supply orders are largest: spring restocking and fall preparation. The amounts Gerald was hiding are calibrated to stay within the normal range of fluctuation for those periods." Caleb looked at the notebook. "He's done this before," Caleb said. Not a question. "This pattern has been consistent for at least 18 months, Eleanor said, "which is as far back as the ledgers you gave me access to. I can't tell you whether it goes further without looking at the older records." "It goes further," Caleb said. She looked at him. His jaw was tight. 2 years ago, my spring purchase orders cost significantly more than I expected. Gerald explained it as feed price increases due to a hard winter in the supply regions. I checked the market reports he gave me. They confirmed it." He paused. Those market reports came from Gerald. The silence between them had weight. "He's careful," Eleanor said. "He's very careful," Caleb said. "He's been doing this carefully for long enough that he believed he understood exactly how much attention I paid and exactly where the edges of that attention stopped." "And then I arrived," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "And then you arrived." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "He wasn't trying to humiliate me on that platform," she said. "I mean, he was willing to. He didn't have any particular objection to it. But that wasn't the reason. I wanted you gone before you saw anything you weren't supposed to see," Caleb said. "Before I asked questions about accounts that a new wife would have every natural reason to ask about." She met his eyes. He sized me up the moment he heard the arrangement was serious. A woman from a farming family who had managed her own family's finances. Someone who would have both the access and the ability to understand what the numbers meant. Caleb was very quiet. "He made a mistake," he said finally. "He made several," Eleanor said. "Starting with the assumption that a woman who looked like me would be too humiliated to push back." Something moved in Caleb's face. Not quite anger. Something more contained and more final. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes. I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly, even if the answer isn't comfortable." "I haven't been anything but honest with you since I stepped off that train," she said. "No," he said. "You haven't." He looked down at his coffee and then back at her. "Do you think Gerald has partners? Someone in town maybe, or another buyer? Someone who's been receiving the money on the other end of these ghost invoices?" Eleanor pulled her notebook back and turned to the third page of her notes. "I think that's the right question," she said. "And I don't know the answer yet, but here." She turned the notebook toward him and pointed to a line. "The freighting company name on the fraudulent invoices. Harlan Creek Transit. That's the same name as this town." Caleb stared at it. "There is no Harlan Creek Transit," he said slowly. "Not as a registered company," Eleanor said. "But someone is receiving those payments, and whoever set up the account to receive them knows this territory well enough to use a name that sounds familiar without being specific enough to immediately raise questions." Caleb pushed back from the table. He stood up. Eleanor watched him. "I'm going to find Tom," he said. "Before you do," she said, "think carefully about who else knows. If Gerald has someone in town involved in this moving too quickly or talking to the wrong person, gives him time to disappear the evidence. He's had 7 years to build contingencies." Caleb stopped. He turned and looked at her. "You've thought about this for a while," he said. "I've been lying awake thinking about it for most of the night," she said. "That's what I do when I'm given a problem that matters." He stood there for a moment longer than was necessary. "When this is over," he said, "I intend to have a long conversation with myself about the 48 hours I spent doubting you." "Don't," she said. "Spend that time on something useful." He almost smiled. It didn't quite get there, but it was close. He went to find Tom. Tom Briggs took the news the way Eleanor had expected he would, with a long silence and a controlled face, and then a series of careful, quiet questions that demonstrated he was processing rather than reacting. He was a man who understood the difference between the two. 7 years, Tom said. "At minimum," Caleb said. "He's been at every cattle sale, every contract negotiation." Tom paused. "Every conversation about the ranch's finances that I can remember." "Yes," Caleb said. Tom looked at Eleanor. "You found all this in the ledgers." "The evidence was there," she said. "It just needed someone who was looking." He was quiet for a moment. "Gerald told Caleb you wouldn't last a week." "Gerald told Caleb a lot of things," Eleanor said. Tom's expression was not quite a smile. "He did." He turned back to Caleb. "What do you want to do?" "Carefully," Caleb said. "And correctly. I'm not going after Gerald Fitch based on Eleanor's ledger work alone, no matter how solid it is. I want a second set of eyes on every number before anything moves." "The bank manager in Miles City," Tom said immediately. "Harrington. He's handled Thornton accounts for 12 years. He'd know if anything was off with the payment routing." "He would," Caleb said. "And he's not connected to anyone in Harlan Creek." "I can ride to Miles City tomorrow," Tom said. "Discreetly. Gerald doesn't need to know." "Gerald thinks everything is normal," Caleb said. "I need him to keep thinking that." Tom nodded. He looked at Eleanor again. "Miss Whitaker." "Eleanor," she said. He accepted that. "Eleanor, when Gerald hears you've been in the accounts, and he will hear because he has ears in this house whether we like it or not, he's going to move." "I know," she said. "He'll come at you first," Tom said, "before he comes at Caleb, because you're the new variable. You're the thing he didn't plan for." "I know that too," she said. "Are you prepared for that?" She looked at him steadily. "I came 2,000 miles to be handed a rejection envelope in front of an entire town, and I gave it back," she said. "I think I can manage Gerald Fitch." Tom Briggs looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once definitively, in the manner of a man who has just revised an assessment upward by a considerable degree. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I reckon you can." Gerald Fitch came to the ranch 3 days later. Eleanor saw him from the kitchen window. She watched him ride up and hand his horse to Danny without looking at the boy. the particular unconscious contempt of a man so accustomed to treating people as scenery that he did it without noticing. She went back to the biscuits she was making and did not change her position or her expression when she heard the front door. Caleb met him in the main room. She kept her hands in the dough and listened. "Caleb." Gerald's voice was easy, the practiced ease of a man who works very hard to sound effortless. "How are you finding things? I heard Miss Whitaker is still in residence." "She is," Caleb said. "Longer than expected." A pause. "Is the arrangement progressing?" "We're finding our footing," Caleb said. His voice gave away nothing. He had the particular stillness of a man who is containing something large very deliberately. "Well." Gerald settled into a chair. Eleanor could hear the creak of it. "I thought I'd come out and go over the fall supply orders. We're coming up on that window, and given the weather reports out of the western ranges, I'd want to build some buffer into the feed calculations." "Before we get to that," Caleb said, "I wanted to ask you about something. The Harlan Creek Transit invoices." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. "The freighting costs from last April," Gerald said. "What about them?" "I've been going through the records," Caleb said. "I had some help with the household accounts, and it raised some questions about the supply side." Another pause. Shorter this time. Gerald was recalibrating. "What sort of questions?" "The kind that need answers," Caleb said. "Do you have documentation for the Harlan Creek transit payments? The originating contracts?" "Of course," Gerald said, and his voice was just slightly too smooth. "I can have those pulled from my office in town. When do you need them by?" "By end of week," Caleb said. "And I'll want to compare them against the delivery records." "Naturally." A beat. "Can I ask what specifically triggered this review? I want to make sure I bring the right materials." "Miss Whitaker noticed some irregularities while she was organizing the household ledgers," Caleb said. The pause that followed was different in texture from the previous ones. It was the pause of a calculation being run very quickly. "Miss Whitaker has been reviewing the ledgers," Gerald said. "She's been helping me get the household accounts in order." "Yes." "That's the household accounts," Gerald said. "The supply side is a different matter. Those aren't really—" He stopped himself. "Those aren't really what Caleb said." Gerald recovered smoothly. "I only mean that they're more complex than the household accounts. I wouldn't want her to spend time on them unnecessarily when I can simply answer any questions directly." "She identified the questions just fine," Caleb said. "I think she can manage the complexity." In the kitchen, Eleanor pressed her palms into the dough and breathed slowly. "End of week," Gerald said. His voice had returned to its practiced ease, but there was something underneath it now. Not quite fear. Something more calculated than fear. "I'll have everything ready." He did not stay for coffee. Eleanor heard the front door open and close. She heard Caleb cross to the window. She gave him a moment and then came through to the main room, wiping her hands on her apron. "He'll move quickly," she said. "He moved the moment I said your name," Caleb said. "You pushed him exactly right," she said. "You gave him specific enough detail that he knows what you've found, but not specific enough that he knows how much. That's the right amount of pressure." Caleb looked at her. "Tom gets back from Miles City tomorrow." "Then we have until tomorrow," she said. What neither of them had fully accounted for was how fast Gerald Fitch could move when he was afraid. That evening, just as the light was fading and the hands were coming in from the day's work, Danny Cowell came into the kitchen with an expression that Eleanor had learned to read as the face of someone who was uncomfortable with what they were carrying. "Miss Eleanor," he said. "Danny." He looked at the door and then back at her. He was barely 20 years old, and he was chewing on something that was clearly too big for him. "If I heard something," he said carefully, "that I wasn't supposed to hear, something that I think you and Caleb ought to know about, would you be angry that I didn't come forward sooner?" Eleanor set down what she was holding and turned to face him fully. "Danny," she said, "tell me what you heard." He had been in the barn that afternoon in one of the back stalls when Gerald's horse was still tied out front. He had been doing the detail work on a bridle that needed mending, the quiet, tedious work that doesn't require movement, and he had heard two men talking on the other side of the barn wall. "Gerald." and a man Danny didn't recognize by voice. He said he needed the records gone, Danny said. The specific ones from Billings. He said there was a woman in the house going through the books, and he needed them moved before the end of the week. Eleanor was very still. He said the woman, she said. Yes, ma'am. Did he say anything else? Danny's jaw tightened. He said if the woman was a problem, there were ways to make a person decide a place wasn't where they wanted to be. The kitchen was completely quiet. Danny, Eleanor said, and her voice was even and controlled and revealed nothing of what was moving through her. Go get Caleb, right now. Don't go past the main barn, and don't talk to anyone except Caleb. Danny was already moving. Caleb took the news with the same contained stillness he had brought to everything connected to Gerald Fitch over the past 3 days. But Eleanor was watching him closely enough now to see the places where that stillness cost him something. The slight tension in his jaw, the way his hands went very quiet on the table, which was not relaxation, but the opposite of it. He threatened you, Caleb said. Indirectly, Eleanor said. Carefully. That doesn't change what it was. No, she said. It doesn't. But it also tells us something important. He's frightened. Frightened people make mistakes that careful people don't. He could also do something stupid before Tom gets back with Harrington, Caleb said. Yes, she said. He could. I'm not willing to wait and see which it is. He stood up. Caleb, she said. He stopped. What are you going to do? She said carefully. I'm going to ride into town, he said. Tonight. Tonight. And say what? She said. Without the documentation from Miles City, without Harrington's confirmation. I'm not going to Gerald, Caleb said. I'm going to Sheriff Aldrin. I'm going to tell him what we've found and what Danny heard, and I'm going to ask him to make sure Gerald Fitch doesn't leave this county before the end of the week. Eleanor looked at him. Is Aldrin a man you trust? She said. I've known him 14 years, Caleb said, and he has no connection to Gerald Fitch's operation that I can find. He paused. But I'll grant that's been my blind spot before. Take Tom, she said. Tom's in Miles City. Then take Pike. Caleb looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. You're not wrong, he said. I'm rarely wrong about risk, she said. I've been managing it too long. He went to the door and then stopped with his hand on the frame. Eleanor, he said. Don't apologize again, she said. Just go and come back. He looked at her over his shoulder with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not quite open, but approaching it like a door that had spent years rusted shut and was beginning to move on its hinges. I was going to say lock the doors, he said. Already planned on it, she said. He left. Eleanor locked the doors. She sent Danny to sleep in the bunkhouse with the other men and told him to stay there and not come out for anything short of fire. She sat at the kitchen table with the lamp and her notebook and the organized annotated ledger copies she'd made, and she went through everything one more time with the focused attention of someone who is preparing to defend a position. Because she was. The night was very quiet. Around midnight she heard something. Not inside. Outside, near the east side of the house, where the secondary entrance came out from the supply room. A sound that was slightly too deliberate for the ordinary noises of a ranch at night. Eleanor put her pencil down. She stood up from the table. She crossed to the supply room and stood inside the door and listened. And what she heard was the particular sound of someone trying a latch with the specific, slow, careful pressure of a person who believes the house is empty and is hoping to confirm it. Her heart was beating very quickly and very precisely the way it had learned to do in the years of managing impossible situations. Not panic, but the sharp, focused acceleration of someone who is about to need to be very clear-headed. She did not open the door. She crossed back to the kitchen, picked up the lamp, and went to the foot of the stairs. "Pike!" she said loudly and clearly. Pike appeared at the top of the stairs with his boots in his hand and his eyes already alert. Caleb had left him in the house rather than the bunkhouse, a decision she had been grateful for when it was made and was profoundly grateful for now. "East supply door," she said. "Someone is trying the latch." Pike set his boots down carefully on the step and came down past her without a word, and Eleanor watched him move to the supply room with the quiet, purposeful speed of a man who knows what to do with his body in a problem. She stayed at the foot of the stairs. She listened. She heard Pike's voice, low flat, authoritative, and another voice that she didn't recognize, higher pitched with the particular sharp edge of someone who has been caught and is trying to manage the situation through talking. Then she heard the back door open and close, then silence. Then Pike came back to the kitchen doorway. "Ranch hand from the Whitmore property," he said. "Claims he got turned around in the dark and thought this was the bunkhouse." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Does the Whitmore property employ a ranch hand who doesn't know this valley well enough to tell the Thornton main house from a bunkhouse?" she said. Pike's expression said everything. "No," he said. "It doesn't." "All right," she said. "I told him to go," Pike said. "Should I have held him?" "Without grounds," Eleanor said. "No, you did the right thing." She thought for a moment. "But I'd like you to remember what he looked like." "Already memorized it," Pike said. She nodded. She went back to the table. "Miss Eleanor," Pike said. She looked up. "You're not scared," he said. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was an observation delivered with the particular respect of someone recalibrating. "I'm quite scared," she said. "But scared is just information. You don't have to act on it." Pike looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and went back to his position at the top of the stairs, and Eleanor Whitaker sat alone in the kitchen of the Thornton Ranch and went back to her notebook, because the fear was real and the threat was real, and none of that changed the fact that the work in front of her still needed doing. Caleb came back before dawn. He came in through the front, and Eleanor heard his boots on the porch before he was through the door, the familiar particular sound of his stride that she had learned, the way she'd learned all the rhythms of this house, without deciding to, without noticing the exact moment it happened. "Sheriff Aldrin is aware of the situation," he said, sitting down across from her. "He's putting eyes on Gerald's movements. He can't act without documentation, but he can make sure Gerald knows he's being watched." "That might be enough," Eleanor said. "A man who knows he's visible changes his calculations." "Someone tried the supply door," Pike said from the doorway. Caleb turned. Pike gave him the full account in about 40 seconds. Caleb listened with his jaw tight and his eyes moving to Eleanor. "You weren't going to mention that," he said. "You just walked in," she said. "Eleanor." Pike handled it correctly. "Nothing happened, and I have written down everything about the encounter in case it becomes relevant later," she said. "I didn't need you to ride back here in the dark for something that was already resolved." He stared at her. "You are the most self-sufficient person I have ever met," he said. "I have had to be," she said. "I am aware of that," he said. "I am also aware that you don't have to be quite that self-sufficient all the time." Eleanor looked at him across the kitchen table in the early gray light. "I'm learning that," she said. "Give me some time." Something crossed his face, that quality of emotion she had seen moving in him more and more frequently over these weeks, something old and careful and unaccustomed to being given room. "Take all the time you need," he said. Tom came back from Miles City the following afternoon. He had Harrington's written assessment in his coat pocket, a careful, methodical bank manager's analysis of the Thornton supply accounts that confirmed every pattern Eleanor had identified and added 3 additional discrepancies she hadn't found yet. The Harlan Creek Transit payments had been routing through a secondary account opened under a shell business name, registered in Billings, registered 6 years ago, 3 months after Gerald Fitch became Caleb's partner. Tom laid it out on the table. Caleb read it twice. Then he looked at Eleanor. "How did you know," he said, "to look at the quarterly intervals?" "Because that's when I would have done it," she said simply. The natural variance in costs during high-volume ordering periods is the easiest place to hide irregular amounts. If I were building a scheme designed to stay invisible, that's where I would put it. Both men looked at her. "It's not a compliment to myself," she said. "I just understand how pressure and need make people think." Tom cleared his throat. "There's one more thing Harrington found." He reached into his inside pocket and produced a second folded paper. "The secondary account. the registered owner of the Harlan Creek Transit Shell Company. He put the paper on the table in front of Caleb. It's not Gerald. Caleb went very still. Eleanor looked at the paper. The name registered to the Shell Company, in Harrington's neat banker's hand, copied from the official billings record, was Victor Blackwell. The silence at that table lasted a long time. Victor Blackwell was not Gerald Fitch's creature. Gerald Fitch was Victor Blackwell's. And Victor Blackwell was the man who had been trying to purchase the Thornton land for the better part of a decade. He didn't want to buy the ranch, Caleb said, and his voice was very quiet. He wanted to drain it until I had no choice but to sell. And put his own man inside to control the timeline, Eleanor said. Caleb looked at her. Gerald wasn't just stealing, she said. He was managing the rate of your decline. Too fast and you'd notice. Too slow, and Blackwell gets impatient. He had to keep the ranch viable enough to look like a going concern while making sure it was always just short of what it could have been. Tom exhaled slowly through his nose. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. 7 years, he said. Yes, Eleanor said. He was in my house, Caleb said. He sat at my table. Yes. And I trusted him. Yes. She met his eyes steadily. And you trusted him because he was careful and patient and specifically chose to be trustworthy in all the places you were paying attention. That isn't a failure of your judgment, Caleb. It's a reflection of how much effort he put into deceiving you. Those are different things. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Something in the set of his face changed. Not softened exactly, but opened in some way that the controlled stillness had been preventing. Eleanor, he said. Yes. I want you to stay. He said it plainly, without preamble, without the careful framing he usually gave things. Not for 3 months. Permanently. As my wife, if you'll have me, or if that's too much to ask right now, then on whatever terms you need. But I want you to stay. The kitchen was very still. Tom Briggs found a reason to examine something on the far wall with great attention. Eleanor looked at the man across the table from her. The man who had almost sent her home, who had spent 48 hours letting doubt speak louder than everything he knew, who had spent every day since showing her something different. Who had sat at this table at 5 in the morning, reading her notations in a ledger. Who had stood in a doorway and told her that missing someone didn't need fixing. Who had picked up her suitcase on a train platform in front of an entire town and walked beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, beside her. Ask me again, she said, when this is over. And what will you say? He said. She held his gaze. Ask me when it's over, she said, and find out. Caleb did not sleep again that night, but this time Eleanor knew it for a different reason. The name Victor Blackwell had changed the air in the room the moment Tom laid that paper on the table. She had felt it, the particular shift that happens when a problem you thought you understood reveals itself to be twice the size you calculated. Gerald Fitch had been a thief working a careful angle inside a trusting man's operation. Victor Blackwell was something else entirely. Victor Blackwell was a man with a plan that had been running for 7 years, patient and deliberate and structured, aimed at one specific outcome: the Thornton land. All of it. Eleanor had spent enough years managing the slow collapse of something she loved to understand what that kind of long game looked like from the inside. You didn't always feel it happening. That was the cruelest part. It felt like bad luck and normal variance, and the ordinary difficulty of keeping something alive in hard country. It only revealed itself as a pattern when you finally had enough distance to see the whole shape of it. Caleb had not had that distance. He had been inside it, working every day, trusting the man beside him to tell him the truth. She understood that particular grief very well. She left him alone with it for most of the evening. Tom had taken the Harrington documents and locked them in the strongbox in the supply room, the only lock on the ranch that required 2 keys, one of which lived on Caleb's person, and one of which Tom kept on a chain under his shirt. Pike was at his position. The ranch was as secure as it could be made without turning it into something that looked like a fort, and announced to the territory that something had changed. Around 9 o'clock. Eleanor made 2 cups of coffee and carried them into the main room, where Caleb was sitting in the chair by the window, not looking at anything in particular. She set 1 cup beside him and took the chair across the room and drank hers in silence. After a while he said, "I hired Gerald because my father trusted his family." "I know," she said. "My father knew Gerald's father for 30 years. When Gerald came to me after my parents died, it felt like continuity, like something familiar in a period that had nothing familiar in it." Eleanor wrapped both hands around her cup. "He knew that," she said quietly. "About the grief. About what that kind of continuity would mean to you." Caleb was very still. "Blackwell approached me 6 months after my parents died," he said. "Made his first offer on the land. I turned him down. 3 months later, Gerald Fitch appeared at my door with a letter of recommendation from my father's attorney and a very reasonable proposal about partnership." He paused. "The timing." "Yes," she said. "I missed it." "You were grieving," she said. "And Gerald was careful. Those two things together are designed to make the pattern invisible." She looked at him steadily. "Caleb, you built this ranch into what it is despite 7 years of someone working against you from the inside. Think about what that means." He looked at her. "It means you're more capable than he calculated," she said. "He needed 7 years and a scheme of considerable sophistication, and the ranch is still here. You are still here. That's not nothing." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "You have the way," he said finally, "of saying things that make a man feel less like a fool than he deserves." "You're not a fool," she said. "You trusted someone who spent years making himself trustworthy. That's what Blackwell paid him to do." He looked at her across the room. "I keep thinking," he said, "about what would have happened if you'd gotten back on that train." The silence that followed had a particular quality, the specific weight of a thing that has been thought but not said before now, sitting in the open air between two people. "Gerald would have found another way to manage the accounts eventually," Eleanor said. "That's not what I was thinking about," Caleb said. She looked at him. He held her gaze with the straightforward honesty that she had come to understand was his natural mode when he finally let himself use it. "I was thinking that I almost let doubt make me the stupidest decision of my life." Eleanor did not look away from him. "Ask me again when this is over," she said. "That's still my answer." He nodded. He picked up his coffee. They sat together in the quiet of the main room until the lamps needed trimming, and neither of them needed to fill the silence with anything more than presence. In the morning, everything moved fast. Tom was at the breakfast table before anyone else, which was saying something given that Eleanor had been up since 5. He had the look of a man who had slept for 4 hours out of necessity and spent the rest of the night thinking, which was a look Eleanor recognized because she had worn it herself recently. "Gerald will go to Blackwell," Tom said without preamble when Caleb came downstairs. "He knows the documentation is compromised. He knows Harrington has been to Miles City. He's calculating right now whether to run or whether Blackwell has resources enough to manage this." "Blackwell has significant resources," Caleb said, sitting down. "He does," Tom said. "But he also has significant exposure if this reaches a judge. A shell company with his name on it, 7 years of fraudulent invoices, and a documented attempt to have someone removed from a private household." He looked at Eleanor. "That's not a man operating from strength. That's a man who's been playing a long game and is suddenly aware the board has changed." "He'll want to move before we do," Eleanor said. "Yes," Tom said. "Which means we need to move first," Caleb said. "Sheriff Aldrin," Tom began. "Aldrin can't act without the documentation, and the documentation needs to be formally presented," Caleb said. "Which means I need to get to Miles City and put this in front of the territorial judge before Blackwell has time to make his own representation." Tom nodded. "I'll ride with you." "You'll stay here," Caleb said. He looked at Eleanor. "Both of you." Eleanor looked back at him. "Caleb," she said carefully. "I know what you're going to say," he said. "Do you? You're going to say that leaving you here while Blackwell still has people watching the ranch is not a well-considered plan. That is exactly what I was going to say. Which is why Pike and Rubin and Harlan are all staying on the property," he said, "visible and armed, and why Tom is going to be within reach of you from the moment I leave until I get back." She studied him. "How long to Miles City and back?" she said. 2 days if I push," he said. 3 if the weather turns. And in that time, if Blackwell decides he'd rather create a problem than wait to see if one develops. Then Tom knows what to do, Caleb said. And so do you. That's not a criticism. That is the most comforting thought I am leaving this ranch with. She was quiet. Eleanor, he said, I need you to let me handle this part. I'm not stopping you, she said. No, he said. But you're looking at me like you're calculating all the ways this could go wrong. I am calculating all the ways this could go wrong, she said. That's not obstruction. That's thoroughness. Caleb almost smiled. What are the top 3, he said. She laid them out without hesitation. Blackwell intercepting him on the road, unlikely, but possible. Blackwell having prior relationship with the territorial judge. She had no information on this, and it concerned her. Blackwell moving against the ranch directly, while Caleb was absent, and the protection was reduced. Caleb listened to all 3 without interrupting. The judge is Harrison Crane, he said. He ruled against Blackwell in a land dispute in 1879. They have no relationship I'm aware of, and the history suggests the opposite of sympathy. Eleanor absorbed that. All right, she said. That addresses the second concern. For the third, keep the strongbox documentation here, rather than carrying it all with you. Take copies. If something happens on the road, the originals are still secure. He looked at her. That, he said, is exactly right. I know, she said. Tom made a sound that might have been a laugh suppressed at the last second. Caleb took copies of the most critical documents and left the originals with Tom. He was ready to ride within the hour, and he came to find Eleanor in the kitchen before he left. She was at the stove. She heard him come in and did not turn around immediately. She was finishing something that required her hands, and when she turned, he was standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands, and the expression on his face was the most open she had ever seen it. I'll be back in 2 days, he said. I know you will, she said. Keep the east supply door locked. It has been locked since the first night, she said. Keep Tom close. Caleb. I know, he said. You're capable of managing this without instruction. I'm not giving you instructions. He stopped. Worried, she said. He looked at her. Yes. That's all right, she said. Come back. He put his hat on. He held her gaze for one more moment. Ask me again when it's over, she said before he could say anything else. He nodded. He left. She listened to the sound of his horse until she couldn't hear it anymore, and then she turned back to the stove. She had work to do. The first day passed without incident, which Eleanor trusted approximately as much as she trusted a sky that looked clear before a storm. Tom felt it too. She could see it in the way he moved around the ranch, always positioned where he could see the road. The east approached the ridgeline that formed the southern boundary of the main property. Pike and Rubin maintained their positions with the particular focused alertness of men who had been given a specific job and understood the weight of it. Danny Cowell stayed close to the main house without being asked. He had not said much since he reported what he'd overheard in the barn, but his quiet presence near the house was its own kind of statement, and Eleanor was grateful for it. She spent the day working through the remaining ledger questions she'd identified, adding to her notes, building the clearest possible record of what she'd found, and how she'd found it in the kind of organized sequence that would hold up to scrutiny from someone who had not been present for any of it. It was the work of someone preparing to explain themselves to a judge, and she was aware of the irony. She had come to Montana as a mail-order bride, and was now building evidentiary documentation for a fraud case. She wrote it all down anyway. By late afternoon, Tom appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Rider on the South Road," he said. Eleanor put down her pencil. "Single rider," she said. "Single. Moving at a pace that isn't hurried. Coming from town." "Blackwell." "No," Tom said. "I know Blackwell's horse. This isn't him." He paused. "It's Martha Griggs." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Martha Griggs. The woman from the platform. The one who had said, "She's bigger than they said," with the careful pseudo-sympathy of a person who enjoys delivering bad news while appearing to regret it. "Let her come in," Eleanor said. Tom looked at her. "Let her come in," Eleanor repeated. "Make her coffee if she wants it. Be polite. and then come listen, because I want a witness to whatever she's here to say." Martha Griggs arrived with the particular stiff-backed demeanor of a woman who has convinced herself she is performing a kindness and is prepared to receive gratitude for it. She accepted coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She looked around the kitchen with the assessing gaze of someone doing an appraisal and not fully concealing it. "Miss Whitaker," she said. "Mrs. Griggs," Eleanor said. "How can I help you?" "I thought I should come in person," Martha said. "Given that I've had certain information come to my attention that I felt you ought to be aware of." Eleanor waited. Martha adjusted her cup on the table. "There has been some talk in town. About Mr. Thornton's situation. About the questions being raised regarding his accounts." Eleanor said nothing. "Victor Blackwell has been speaking to people," Martha said. "He's been saying that there is a woman at the Thornton Ranch who has been going through private business records without authorization. He's suggesting that you may have interfered with legitimate business arrangements. He's using the word fraud, Miss Whitaker, against you." The kitchen was very quiet. Tom, standing just inside the doorway, did not move. Eleanor looked at Martha Griggs steadily. "He's making that claim publicly." "In the saloon last evening," Martha said. "In front of a number of people." She hesitated. "I won't pretend I've always been kind to you. I won't pretend I didn't say things at the station that I should not have said. But what Blackwell is doing, it felt wrong not to tell you." Eleanor studied her. Martha Griggs was not comfortable. The discomfort was real. Eleanor had learned in her years of managing difficult people to tell the difference between performed discomfort and actual remorse. And Martha's hands on her coffee cup had the particular tightness of a woman who was doing something that cost her something. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said. Martha looked at her. She had expected more, it seemed. Either more anger or more gratitude, and the simple directness of Eleanor's response had left her without a footing. "He has money and influence," Martha said, "and he's already poisoning the story." "He's trying to," Eleanor said. "That's different from succeeding." "Miss Whitaker." "Eleanor," she said. Martha stopped. "Call me Eleanor," she said. "And understand that I appreciate you writing out here. Victor Blackwell making public claims about fraud is information I need. The fact that he's doing it in the saloon before Caleb is back tells me exactly how frightened he is." Martha blinked. "Frightened. A man who is confident in his position waits," Eleanor said. "He doesn't start shouting in the saloon the moment someone begins asking questions about his ledgers. He shouts when he realizes the questions have already found answers he can't explain." She held Martha's gaze. "This is him trying to control the story before we can tell it ourselves." Martha was quiet for a moment. Then slowly something shifted in her face. "He'll come at you harder," she said, "when the shouting doesn't work." "I know," Eleanor said. "That's why I'm ready." Martha left an hour later. She did not apologize in so many words for what had happened on the platform. She was not quite built for that kind of directness, Eleanor had decided, and pushing for it would have been its own form of cruelty. But she stopped at the kitchen door on her way out and said, "The ranch looks better than it has in years," in a voice that was stripped of its usual performance, plain and factual, and that was its own kind of something. "Thank you, Mrs. Griggs," Eleanor said. Martha nodded once tightly and left. Tom came fully into the kitchen. "She's right about Blackwell," he said. "If he's already working the saloon, he's planning to have the town's version of this story set before the legal one can take hold." "He's good at that," Eleanor said. "He's had years of practice shaping how people see Caleb's operation." She picked up her pencil. "Which means we need Caleb back before Blackwell's version calcifies." "Caleb knows how to move fast when he needs to," Tom said. "I know," Eleanor said. "I'm counting on it." What she did not say, because saying it would not have helped anyone, was that she was also counting on something else, on the particular instinct she had developed over years of managing situations where the ground shifted underfoot. The instinct that told her the next problem was not going to come from the direction she was watching. It came that night. And it did not come from Blackwell's men, or from the East Supply door, or from the South Road. It came from Danny Cowell, who appeared at her bedroom door at just after 11 o'clock, with a look on his face that Eleanor had not seen on him before. "There's a man at the bunkhouse," Danny said. "He came in about an hour ago. He said Caleb sent him. He said there was a problem on the road, and Caleb needed Tom to ride out tonight." Eleanor was out of bed before Danny finished the sentence. "Where is Tom?" she said. "Still in the bunkhouse," Danny said. "He's listening to the man. I don't think he's going anywhere yet, but the man is very convincing." "What does the man look like?" Danny described him mid-40s. Dark coat, spoke with a slight accent from somewhere east. Not a face Danny had seen before, but presenting himself with the ease of someone who expected to be believed. Eleanor crossed to the small desk in her room and pulled out a piece of paper and wrote 3 words on it and folded it in half. "Take this to Tom," she said. "Right now, don't run walk normally, hand it to him directly. If the man tries to read it, stop and wait until he can't see." Danny took the paper. He was gone less than 3 minutes. He came back with Tom's response written in Tom's large, deliberate hand on the back of her note. "Good instinct. I know. Stalling. Come if safe." She pulled on her coat and followed Danny to the bunkhouse. The man was sitting at the long table in the bunkhouse, a cup of something in front of him, speaking in the relaxed, persuasive manner of someone accustomed to managing rooms. Tom was across the table from him, with the particular expression of a man maintaining polite neutrality, while believing nothing he's being told. Eleanor came in and sat down beside Tom without preamble. The man looked at her. He recalibrated. She saw it happen, the slight adjustment in his posture, the reassessment of the room. He thought he'd understood. "Miss Whitaker," he said pleasantly, "I don't believe we've met. I'm bringing a message from Mr. Thornton." "Which road?" Eleanor said. He blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Which road did the problem occur on?" she said. "Caleb left this morning for Miles City. There are 2 routes. Which road was he on when he ran into trouble?" The man smiled with the ease of someone buying time. "The Northern Pass." "Caleb takes the valley route to Miles City," Tom said quietly. "Every time. He hasn't taken the Northern Pass since the spring slide 2 years ago." The smile stayed, but something left the eyes. "The valley route, of course," the man said. "I may have misidentified." "Who sent you?" Eleanor said. "Mr. Thornton." "Who actually sent you?" she said. Her voice was even and calm and completely without heat, which was, she had found, considerably more unnerving than anger. "Because Caleb Thornton knows which road he takes to Miles City, and anyone he actually sent with a message would know it too." The man stood up. Tom was on his feet faster, and Eleanor registered with a distant appreciation that Tom Briggs had been ready for this moment from the second the stranger walked in the door. "You can sit back down," Tom said. "Or you can explain yourself standing. But you are not leaving this bunkhouse until one of those things has happened." The man looked at Tom. He looked at Eleanor. He made the calculation. He sat back down. "I was paid to bring a message," he said. "I don't know who hired the man who hired me. That's the honest truth." "What was the message supposed to accomplish?" Eleanor said. He looked at her. "Get the senior ranch hand off the property for the night." The silence in the bunkhouse was absolute. "And then," Tom said. The man shook his head. "That's all I was told. Get the foreman away from the ranch for the night. I don't know what comes after." Eleanor and Tom exchanged one look. "Pike," Tom said. Pike appeared in the bunkhouse doorway, as though he had been standing just outside it, which Eleanor realized he probably had been. "Stay with him," Tom said. "He doesn't go anywhere, and nobody comes in." He looked at Eleanor. She was already moving. They crossed the dark yard to the main house at a fast walk, not running, because running announces panic, and panic makes mistakes. "They want the house empty of people who can stop them," Eleanor said quietly. "If they'd gotten Tom out on the road." "I know," Tom said. "The documents in the strongbox. That's what this is about," she said. "Not the ranch, not tonight. Tonight is about the documents. If those originals disappear, all we have is copies and Harrington's testimony and a pattern that a good lawyer can create enough doubt around to delay for years." "Who's left in the house?" Tom said. "Reuben and Harlan," she said. "I told them to stay inside before I came to the bunkhouse." "Good." Tom pushed open the front door and they came into the main room. Reuben was at the window facing the south approach. Harlan was in the hallway leading to the supply room. "Anything," Tom said. "Nothing on the south side," Reuben said. "Harlan," Tom said. Harlan turned. He had a strange expression, not alarmed, not quite right. Eleanor saw it a half-second before Tom did. "Harlan," she said, "where is the key to the supply room?" Harlan's hand went to his pocket. It was a reflex. He hadn't meant to do it. He realized it the moment he did it, and went very still. The air in the hallway changed. "Harlan," Tom said, and his voice had gone very quiet in the particular way of a man controlling the impulse not to be quiet. "Give me the key." "Tom, Give me the key." Harlan took the key from his pocket with a hand that wasn't steady and held it out, and Tom crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and took it. "Get out of this house," Tom said. "Sit on the porch where I can see you and don't move." Harlan went. Eleanor and Tom reached the supply room door. Tom unlocked it. They went in. The strongbox was in its position. Tom produced his key and opened it. Every document was where it had been placed. Nothing had been touched. Tom leaned against the wall with his hand still on the open box. "He hadn't done it yet," Eleanor said. "He was waiting," Tom said. "For me to leave. Or for a signal," she said. "Or for a specific time. We moved faster than they expected." Tom looked at the documents in the strongbox with an expression that was difficult to name. Relief and fury, and something underneath both of those that was more personal and more painful. "Harlan has been on this ranch for 4 years," he said. "I know," Eleanor said. "He knows these men. He knows me." "I know." Tom was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled. "How long?" "I don't know," she said. "That's a question for Caleb." She paused. "Tom, this is more evidence, not less. This is Blackwell showing us exactly how desperate he is." Tom looked at her. "We need Caleb back now," he said. "Send Danny tonight," she said. "He's fast, and he knows the valley route, and he'll reach Miles City before noon tomorrow if he rides through." Tom nodded. He closed the strongbox and locked it and put his key back around his neck. "Danny," he said. "Danny," she confirmed. They came back out to the main room, and Tom sent Reuben to get Danny from the bunkhouse. And while they waited, Eleanor stood at the window looking out at the dark yard where Harlan sat on the porch steps as instructed, his shoulders rounded, his hands between his knees. She felt no satisfaction. She had expected to feel something clean and definitive when the shape of the conspiracy became clear. But what she felt instead was the particular grief of someone who has watched a second betrayal. Hurt someone who was just beginning to recover from the first. Danny appeared in the doorway, awake and alert, with the look of a young man who had been waiting to be useful. Eleanor turned from the window. "Danny," she said, "I need you to ride to Miles City tonight. You know the valley route." "Yes, ma'am." "You'll find Caleb Thornton at the Whitmore Hotel. He stays there when he goes to Miles City for business. Tell him what happened tonight. Tell him about the man in the bunkhouse and about Harlan. Tell him—" She paused. "Tell him the documents are safe and we're all right. Tell him those words first before anything else, so he doesn't ride back at a pace that gets him or his horse killed." Danny nodded. "And Danny." She looked at him steadily. "Ride fast, but ride careful." "Yes, ma'am," Danny said. And he meant it the way a boy means something when a person he respects has said it to him directly. He was gone within 10 minutes. Eleanor locked the front door and went back to the kitchen table and her notebook, because the work still needed doing and the night was not over, and she had learned a long time ago that the only way through a problem was through it. Tom sat across from her. "You could sleep," he said. "So could you," she said. He poured coffee. They sat together in the lamplight, and outside the Montana night was very dark and very still. And somewhere on the valley road, Caleb Thornton was sleeping in a hotel room, not yet knowing that the woman he had asked to stay had spent his absence holding everything he'd built together with both hands. The following afternoon, Caleb came back. He came back fast. She heard the horse well before she saw him. The particular urgent rhythm of a rider who has been given news and processed it somewhere on the road and arrived already decided. He came through the front without stopping and found Eleanor at the kitchen table and Tom in the chair beside her. And he stood in the doorway and looked at her with an expression that had everything in it and said none of it. "The documents," he said. "Safe," she said. "Exactly where we left them." He exhaled. "Harlan," he said. Tom answered that one. Quietly, completely the way Tom did things. Caleb listened without moving. When Tom finished, Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "He came to me," he said. "When I first bought the ranch, before Gerald, before any of it. He came with recommendations, and I hired him because I needed men, and he seemed solid." He paused. "Blackwell has had people inside this operation for longer than I realized." "Yes," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "You held this together." "Tom held it together," she said. "I just asked the right questions." "Eleanor." "Caleb." "Stop deflecting what you did," he said, and the directness of it stopped her. "You identified the scheme. You documented the evidence. You caught the messenger last night and moved fast enough to stop what would have happened." He held her gaze with the full weight of everything he felt. "Stop minimizing that." She was quiet. "All right," she said finally. "All right," he said. He sat down at the table. He put the documents he'd carried from Miles City Harrington's signed statement, the judge's preliminary review notations, the official record of the meeting on the table between them. "Judge Crane has agreed to hear the formal case," Caleb said. "I'm to present the originals in Miles City in 4 days. The sheriff has been notified. And Blackwell." He paused. "Blackwell does not yet know that Crane has already agreed to hear it." Tom looked up. "How long do we have before he finds out?" "In a town the size of Miles City, with his resources," Caleb said. 2 days, maybe 3. "Then we have a window," Eleanor said. "A narrow one," Caleb said. He looked at the papers on the table. He looked at Eleanor. "I need you to come with me to Miles City," he said, "to testify to how the evidence was found and document the chain from discovery to this table." She met his eyes. "I know what that means," he said. "I know what I'm asking. Blackwell will know your name and what you've done before we're through. He'll make sure everyone in this territory knows." "Victor Blackwell has already made sure everyone in the saloon knows my name," Eleanor said. "He just had the story wrong." Caleb looked at her for one long moment. "Are you ready for this?" he said. She thought about the platform, the envelope, the 2,000 miles, the 48 hours of doubt, the ledgers and the lamp, and the 3 pages of notes she had written at midnight while a strange man tried to send Tom out into the dark. She thought about what she had come here looking for. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." And in the expression on Caleb Thornton's face, open and certain, and without any of the careful reserve he had worn, like a second coat. For as long as she had known him, Eleanor Whitaker saw for the first time exactly what she had been staying for. They left for Miles City before sunrise. Caleb had spent the previous evening going through every document one final time, organizing them in the sequence. Judge Crane's clerk had specified, and Eleanor had sat across the table doing the same with her own annotated copies, the ones she had made by hand during those late nights at the kitchen table, marked with her notations in the careful, precise handwriting that Caleb had come to recognize as fluently as his own. Tom stayed at the ranch. He had not argued about it. He understood that someone with authority needed to remain on the property, and he also understood without it being said that leaving the ranch visibly diminished would be exactly the signal Blackwell's people were waiting for. Pike and Reuben were there. Danny had come back from his night ride and slept 4 hours and was back on his feet with the particular resilience of the young. The ranch would hold. Harlan was gone. He had left before dawn the morning after he'd been caught, and none of them had stopped him. Tom had made that call, and Caleb had confirmed it when he returned holding Harlan on the property, without legal authority, created more problems than it solved, and every man they had now was a man they trusted. That was not nothing. Eleanor rode beside Caleb on the valley road in the gray light before sunrise, and she was thinking about the hearing. running through the sequence of what she'd found, the order in which she would present it, the questions a skeptical judge might ask about a woman with no formal training in accounting who had inserted herself into a wealthy man's private business records. She had answers for all of those questions. She had been constructing them for days. What she had not constructed an answer for was what happened after. She was aware of it the way you are aware of a door at the end of a hallway. You know. It's there. You can see its shape, but you are focused on the hallway, because the hallway is what requires your attention right now. After was a door she had not yet opened. She was not afraid of what was behind it. She simply had not allowed herself to look directly at it while the hallway was still this complicated. Caleb rode without speaking for the first hour, which she had come to understand was not distance, but thought. He processed things by going quiet. She had learned to read the quality of his silences, the tight, controlled silence of anger, the heavy silence of grief, the particular open silence of a man who is simply present with his surroundings and the person beside him. This was the third kind. Eventually he said, "I want to tell you something before we get to Miles City." "All right," she said. "About why I agreed to the marriage arrangement in the first place." He kept his eyes on the road. "I told you I'd spent years building this ranch, and I told you I wanted a partner, and those things are true. But they're the surface version." Eleanor waited. "After my parents died," he said, "I spent about 2 years telling myself I was fine, that I didn't need anyone, that the work was enough and the land was enough, and a man who'd built something from nothing ought to be grateful and stop looking for more." He paused. "And then one winter, I came in from 3 days of riding fence line in a snowstorm, and I walked into that house, and it was exactly the same as when I left it. Same cold, same quiet, same nothing." He was quiet for a moment. "And I stood in that hallway, and I thought, I have built this house for no one. There is no one to come home to, and there is no one who will notice if I don't come home. And that thought was, it was the loneliest thing I've ever felt." Eleanor was very still on her horse. "So you wrote a letter," she said. "So I asked Gerald to place the advertisement," he said. "Which in retrospect, don't," she said quietly. He looked at her. "Don't attach Gerald's betrayal to the impulse that drove you to do it," she said. "The impulse was honest. Gerald's exploitation of it is a different thing entirely." Caleb held her gaze for a moment. "You do that," he said. "Do what? Separate things that have gotten tangled, cleanly and quickly, and without making a production of it." He looked back at the road. "It's one of the things I—" He stopped. She did not push him to finish. He did eventually on his own. "It's one of the things I love about you," he said. Quiet. Straightforward. The same way he said everything that was true. The road was very still around them. Eleanor looked at the valley stretching ahead in the early light, and she felt something shift in her chest. Not a dramatic shift. Not the explosive feeling that stories described when they talked about love. Something more like the feeling of a window opening in a room that has been closed for a long time. Gradual. Irreversible. "Ask me again when this is over," she said. "I know," he said. "But Caleb." He looked at her. "The answer is not going to surprise you," she said. Howe was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once the way he nodded when something was settled, and they rode on toward Miles City in the growing light. Miles City was larger than Harlan Creek, a proper territorial town, with a main street that had a bank and 2 hotels and a courthouse that had been built with the particular civic ambition of a place that intended to matter. Caleb took them to the Whitmore Hotel, where he was known, and secured 2 rooms without fanfare. Eleanor changed out of her riding clothes and put on the dress she'd brought, the best one she owned, a deep blue wool that had been her good dress since Ohio, worn to church and to her father's funeral, and to every occasion in her life that had required her to present herself as someone who deserved to be taken seriously. She had never needed it to work as hard as it was going to work today. Caleb knocked on her door when it was time. She opened it, and he looked at her, not with the assessing gaze of a man evaluating a woman's appearance, but with the particular look of someone who sees a person clearly and wants them to know it. "Ready," he said. "Ready," she said. They walked to the courthouse together. Judge Harrison Crane was a compact, deliberate man in his 60s, with the economical manner of someone who had spent decades separating what mattered from what didn't, and had become very good at it. He received them in his chambers first before the formal hearing, which Caleb's Miles City attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Foster, who Caleb had contacted by wire from the hotel, had arranged as a professional courtesy. Crane looked at Eleanor across his desk. "You are the woman who identified the discrepancies," he said. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "You have no formal accounting training." "No, Your Honor. I managed my family's farm accounts from the age of 19 until the property was sold. I have practical experience rather than formal credentials." "The difference between those two things," Crane said, "is generally a certificate, and not much else in my experience." He looked at the documents on his desk. "Tell me how you found the first irregularity," she told him, precisely sequentially without embellishment. She had learned that precision was its own form of credibility, that the clearest sign of someone telling the truth was the absence of the unnecessary details people added when they were trying to convince someone rather than simply informing them. Crane listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "And the Harlan Creek Transit name," he said. "You identified that as significant because the name was too local to be coincidental and too generic to be traceable," she said. "Someone who understood the territory used a name that would read as familiar to anyone from Harlan Creek, but that couldn't be cross-referenced to a specific business without the kind of deliberate search that a routine audit wouldn't trigger." Crane looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary for processing the information. "Foster," he said to the attorney. "Your Honor, the woman knows what she's talking about." Foster allowed himself a small, controlled smile. "She does, Your Honor." "Proceed to the formal hearing," Crane said. The hearing itself lasted most of the afternoon. Eleanor testified for nearly 2 hours. She presented every document in sequence, explained every annotation, answered every question Crane asked, and several that Foster asked on the record for the sake of the official account. She was cross-referenced against Harrington's bank testimony, which aligned at every point, and against the registered records from Billings that confirmed the Harlan Creek Transit Shell Company and its connection to Victor Blackwell. She did not lose her composure. She did not embellish. She did not perform. She simply told the truth in order with evidence. When it was over, and Crane had retired to consider the record, Caleb sat beside her in the hallway outside the hearing room and said nothing for a long moment. "You were remarkable in there," he said. "I was accurate," she said. "That's different." "It's not always different," he said. Foster appeared from the far end of the hallway, walking quickly with an expression that was difficult to read, but carried energy in it. "There's something you need to know," Foster said. "Blackwell is here." Caleb went still. "In Miles City," Eleanor said. "Arrived this morning," Foster said. "He has his own attorney, William Chase. Boston-trained, expensive, very good. They've filed a counter-representation requesting that Crane hear Blackwell's account before issuing any preliminary finding." "Can Crane refuse?" Caleb said. "He can delay it," Foster said. "But refusing outright is difficult given Blackwell's standing. He's a significant landowner in this territory." "What does Chase's counter-representation claim?" Eleanor said. Foster hesitated. "Tell her," Caleb said. "The counter-representation argues that the documents presented were obtained improperly," Foster said. "Specifically, it claims that Miss Whitaker, as an unauthorized person with no legal standing in the Thornton household and no formal arrangement at the time, the records were accessed, conducted what amounts to an unlawful search of private business records." The hallway was quiet. Eleanor understood the architecture of it immediately. She had understood something like it was coming since the night Martha Griggs had come to the ranch with her uncomfortable warning. Blackwell was not going to fight the evidence. He was going to fight her right to have found it. "When was I without legal standing in the Thornton household?" she said. Foster looked at her carefully. "The counter-representation argues that a 3-month informal arrangement without a formal marriage or legal documentation of partnership does not constitute the standing necessary to access private business records." "I accessed household ledgers," Eleanor said. At Caleb's explicit request, and with his full knowledge, the business records I reviewed subsequently were provided to me by Tom Briggs, also with Caleb's authorization. She looked at Foster. Is there documentation of that authorization? Verbal authorization is more difficult to. I kept notes, she said. Foster stopped. Every conversation in which Caleb or Tom gave me access to any document, she said. Date, time, what was discussed, what was provided. I kept a record because I understood from the beginning that my presence in those accounts was unusual, and I wanted a clear account of how everything happened. She opened the bag she carried and produced her notebook. It's all in here. Foster stared at the notebook. Caleb was looking at her with an expression she had never quite seen on him before. Not surprise, exactly. Something deeper than surprise. The particular look of a person who has been consistently underestimated by everyone around them and is standing next to someone who did the same thing and is choosing not to. You anticipated this, he said. I anticipated that my word might not be enough, she said. So I made sure my word wasn't what we were relying on. Foster took the notebook with the careful hands of a man receiving something valuable. This, he said, flipping through it, changes the argument considerably. Yes, Eleanor said. It does. What followed was an hour. Foster conferred with Crane's clerk. Eleanor's notebook was formally entered into the record, and Blackwell's attorney, William Chase, was informed that the counter-representation's core argument had been substantially undermined by contemporaneous documentation. Eleanor and Caleb waited in the courthouse hallway. They did not see Blackwell directly, but at one point, crossing from one end of the hallway to the other with his attorney, he passed them at a distance of perhaps 20 feet. I was a tall man, heavier than she'd imagined, with the particular bearing of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around his presence. He looked at Caleb. He looked at Eleanor. His expression when he looked at Eleanor was not contempt. It was something colder and more specific than contempt. It was the expression of a man who has just understood that the variable he dismissed has become the thing that defeats him. Eleanor held his gaze without moving. He looked away first. Caleb noticed. He said nothing about it, but she felt the slight shift in his posture beside her, not protective, not proprietary. Simply present. The same way he had stood beside her on the platform in Harlan Creek on the first day. Beside her. Not between her and the problem. Beside her. Foster came back with news before the end of the day. Crane had reviewed the full record, including Eleanor's notebook. He had declined to hear Blackwell's counter-representation before issuing a preliminary finding ruling that the documentation of authorized access was sufficient to establish Eleanor's standing. The preliminary finding went against Blackwell on the shell company fraud. The paper trail was too clear and too thoroughly documented to be explained away. A formal hearing on the full scope of the scheme would be scheduled within 30 days, at which point Blackwell and Gerald Fitch would both be required to answer. In the meantime, a notice of litigation had been placed against both men's assets in the territory, meaning the land purchase. Blackwell had been engineering for 7 years, was now frozen. Foster shook Caleb's hand. He turned to Eleanor and shook her hand too, which she suspected was not something he did without thought. The notebook, he said. That was the difference today. I know, she said. Outside the courthouse in the late afternoon light, Caleb stopped walking. Eleanor stopped beside him. It's over, he said. The preliminary stage, she said. There's still a formal hearing. Eleanor. She stopped. The formal hearing is a process, he said. The outcome is already written in that notebook of yours and in 18 months of Harrington's bank records. Blackwell knows it. His attorney knows it. That's what I saw on his face in that hallway. He looked at her. It's over. She was quiet. Yes, she said. I suppose it is. He reached into his coat pocket. She watched him. He produced a small object and held it in his palm, a ring plain and solid silver rather than gold, with the particular worn quality of something that had been carried for a while rather than recently purchased. This was my mother's, he said. She gave it to my father when they made their arrangement. It was not a wealthy ring. They were not wealthy people at the time, but she said it was important to her that it was a ring she chose herself rather than one he bought her because she wanted the choosing to be mutual. He held it in his palm. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to the right woman. Eleanor looked at the ring. She looked at him. The question I've been waiting to ask you, he said, is no longer about whether you'll stay. He held her gaze with everything in it. The 48 hours of doubt, and the morning coffee, and the ledger notations, and the doorway, and 2,000 miles, and every word of every letter. It's whether you'll marry me, as a full partner, in every sense of that word. Not because you need somewhere to belong, but because you choose it. The late afternoon was very quiet around them. Eleanor looked at the ring in his hand. She thought about her father's farm. She thought about the train. She thought about the envelope she had placed back into Gerald Fitch's hand on a platform in Harlan Creek, while an entire town watched and waited for her to break. She had not broken. She had never been going to break. She looked up at Caleb Thornton. Yes, she said. Simple. Complete. Without performance or qualification. He put the ring on her finger, and it fit the way things fit when they are exactly right, and neither of them said anything for a moment, because there was nothing that needed saying. Then Caleb said, "We should tell Tom." "Tom already knows," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "Tom has known for at least 3 weeks," she said. "He's just been waiting for us to catch up." Caleb let out a breath that was almost a laugh, the real kind, unguarded, the kind she had been hearing more and more from him these past weeks, and had come to hold as one of the things she would not trade for anything. They rode back to the Whitmore Hotel side by side, and that evening they had supper in the hotel dining room, and Foster joined them, and it was the first meal in months that was not organized around a problem that needed solving. It was simply supper. Good food and straight talk and the particular ease of people who have been through something difficult together and come out the other side of it with more than they went in with. Foster raised a glass. "To careful record-keeping," he said. Eleanor raised hers. "To asking the right questions." Caleb looked at her. He raised his glass. "To the woman who came to Montana and stayed," he said. The ride home the next morning was different in quality from every ride that had come before it. Not because the landscape had changed. Not because anything dramatic was different in the way the valley looked, or the way the horses moved, or the way the mountain air sat in the lungs. In that particular way, it had at altitude. But something in the quality of the silence between them had shifted. It had the ease of a thing that had been decided, the particular piece of people who are no longer waiting to know what they are to each other. Eleanor wore the ring. She was aware of it, the way you are aware of something new that belongs to you. Not conspicuously, not anxiously, but with the steady, quiet recognition of something that is now simply part of how things are. They arrived at the ranch in early afternoon. Tom came out of the barn when he heard them ride in. He looked at Eleanor's hand. He looked at Caleb. "Well?" Tom said. "Well?" Caleb agreed. Tom nodded. He turned back to the barn. "Supper's going to be ready at 6, Eleanor called after him. Tom raised a hand without turning around. It was as close to effusive as Tom Briggs was built to get, and Eleanor understood it perfectly and was more moved by it than she would have been by anything louder. Danny came out of the house. He had apparently taken on some responsibility for the kitchen in Eleanor's absence, with results that she suspected she would need to gently address, and he saw the ring before he saw anything else, because he was 20 years old, and that was the sort of thing 20-year-olds noticed. His face broke into a grin that he tried to contain and failed at entirely. "Congratulations, Miss Eleanor," he said. "Thank you, Danny," she said. "And please tell me you didn't burn anything." "Only a little," he said. The days that followed had a different texture than the weeks before them. Not easier, necessarily. There was still a formal hearing to prepare for, still the ongoing reality of a ranch that had been quietly undermined for 7 years and needed rebuilding. Still the ordinary complicated work of two people negotiating what it meant to share a life. But the urgency had changed. The crisis had passed its acute phase and settled into the longer work of recovery and reconstruction, which was, Eleanor knew from experience, in many ways harder than the crisis itself, because it required patience rather than speed. She was good at patience. The formal hearing in Miles City came 6 weeks later. Both she and Caleb testified. Gerald Fitch, facing the weight of documentation that Harrington Foster and Eleanor's notebook had assembled against him, made a calculation in the first hour of the hearing that a guilty plea on reduced charges was better than the full exposure of a contested trial. He named Blackwell in full detail. He described the arrangement, the timeline, the specific instructions he had been given, and the payments he had received. Victor Blackwell sat across the room and heard his own scheme described by the man he had employed to run it, and his face throughout was the controlled mask of someone who has lost and knows it and is deciding what kind of losing he wants the room to see. He did not look at Eleanor. She noticed. She sat beside Caleb, and her notebook was on the table in front of her, and she watched the hearing with the focused attention she gave to everything that mattered. And when it was over, and Judge Crane had delivered the findings against Blackwell on 5 counts of fraud and conspiracy against Fitch, on 4 counts with the reduced charge acknowledged, she felt not triumph, but something quieter and more complete. Justice had a particular sound she found. It was not loud. It was the sound of a room going very still because what needed to be said had been said finally in the right place, with the right people listening. Outside the courthouse, Caleb took her hand. Not dramatically, not with a speech. He simply reached over and took her hand the way people do when they have decided that being close to someone is not something that needs an occasion. She held on. Foster shook hands with them both on the courthouse steps. He looked at Eleanor for a moment with the direct appraising look of a man who had spent a career evaluating people under pressure. "I've been practicing law in this territory for 22 years, he said. "I've worked with a lot of witnesses." He paused. "You were the best I've seen." Eleanor looked at him. "I just told the truth in order," she said. "Miss Whitaker," Foster said. "You have no idea how rare that is." The ride back to Harlan Creek felt like a different journey than any they had taken before. It was the first time they had ridden toward the ranch without a problem waiting at the other end of it. The first time the ranch was simply home, not a site of crisis, not a thing to be defended, not a place to get back to before something else went wrong. Just home. The place where Tom was doing the evening work, and Danny was managing the kitchen with variable results, and the stove in the back left corner that Eleanor had never gotten around to having Jensen fix was still losing heat and probably needed addressing before winter. Just home. Ordinary and irreplaceable. Caleb rode beside her. He had been quieter than usual since the hearing. Not the tight, controlled silence of difficulty, but something reflective and settled. She let him have it. She understood the particular processing that happens when something you have been fighting is finally over, and your nervous system needs time to learn that it can stand down. About an hour from the ranch, he said, "My father built that house with the idea that he'd fill it." "I know," she said. "He used to say that a house without people in it is just a very expensive barn." Eleanor smiled. He wasn't wrong. "He'd have liked you," Caleb said. She was quiet for a moment. "Tell me something about him," she said. Caleb thought about it. "He couldn't boil water without burning it," he said. "My mother said he had many virtues and cooking was not among them. He built everything on this ranch himself, the main structure, the barn, the fencing on the north quarter, with his own hands." But she never let him near the kitchen after the incident with the coffee pot in the spring of '61, which she described to me on 3 separate occasions as the most alarming morning of her life. He paused. She said it with enormous affection every time. Eleanor laughed a real laugh unguarded, and Caleb turned and looked at her when it happened. "I want to hear that more," he said. "Hear what? That." He nodded toward her. "That sound." She looked at him. "You'll have plenty of opportunities," she said. "I suspect your stories about your father are going to be very good." "He was a very good man," Caleb said. "I know," she said. "You built what he started." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "We'll build what comes next," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. "We will." They rode into the ranch yard as the light was going long and golden, the way it went in the late afternoon at that altitude, and Tom came out of the barn and looked at their faces and nodded once in the manner of a man who has confirmed what he already knew, and Danny appeared on the porch and yelled something about supper that was probably a warning about the state of it. and Eleanor swung down from her horse and felt the ground solid under her feet and looked at the house. The big timber house built by a man who intended permanence, and she thought, yes, this is what I came here for. Not the rescue, not the ring, not the story people would tell about the rejected mail-order bride who ended up with the richest rancher in the valley. Not any of the versions of this that other people would construct and pass around. She came for the thing that was real, the work and the table and the man who stood beside her rather than in front of her, and the house that had been empty for years and was now finally fully inhabited. Caleb came up beside her. He did not say anything. He did not need to. She walked toward this house, and he walked beside her, and behind them, the Montana sky was doing what Montana skies did in the late afternoon, spreading itself out wide and enormous, and entirely indifferent to the small human lives moving beneath it, which was Eleanor had come to understand one of its great gifts. The land did not care about your history, or your size, or what anyone had said about you on a train platform 2 months ago. It simply continued. It asked only whether you were willing to work and whether you intended to stay. She was. She did. The wedding was set for the second Saturday of October. Eleanor had not wanted anything large. She had said so plainly the evening Caleb asked about it, sitting at the kitchen table after supper with the lamp between them and the first real cold of the season beginning to find its way through the walls. She had said she wanted something real, not something performed. Something that meant what it was supposed to mean, rather than something designed to make an impression on people who had already spent enough of their time deciding what to think of her. Caleb had said that sounded exactly right to him. Tom had nodded from his chair by the window, as though he had been consulted, which he had not been, but which Eleanor did not mind, because Tom's judgment had proven reliable enough that his opinions felt like useful information even when they weren't requested. Danny had asked if he could make something for the occasion, and Eleanor had said yes before she understood what she was agreeing to, which led to a 3-day project involving dried apples and a pastry technique Danny had apparently read about in one of the books she'd been lending him, the results of which were, she told him honestly, better than she expected, and genuinely good by any fair measure. He had gone pink with pride and tried to hide it, and Eleanor had let him. What she had not anticipated was the town. Harlan Creek had watched the Thornton fraud case move through the territorial courts, the way small towns watch anything that disrupts the story. They have already told themselves about the people in it, with the particular discomfort of a community that needs to reconcile what it believed with what turned out to be true. Victor Blackwell had been a man of standing in the valley for a long time. Gerald Fitch had been trusted. And the woman they had assessed in 30 seconds on a train platform and found insufficient had turned out to be the person who unraveled both of them. That required adjustment. Some people adjusted well. Martha Griggs came to the ranch 2 weeks before the wedding with a jar of her preserved peaches and a manner that was not quite apologetic, but was noticeably different from the woman who had pressed close to Agnes Beaumont on the platform and said, "She's bigger than they said." She sat at Eleanor's kitchen table and drank coffee and talked about the valley in winter, and before she left, she said simply and without elaboration, "I misjudged you at the station. I expect you know that." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I know." "I'd like to do better," Martha said. "Then do better," Eleanor said. "That's all it takes." Martha left with the particular expression of someone who has been offered something simpler than they expected, and is still deciding whether simplicity is a gift or a dismissal. Eleanor suspected she would conclude eventually that it was a gift. Agnes Beaumont never came. That was all right too. The morning of the wedding. Eleanor woke before anyone else in the house and lay in her room, the small room she had slept in since the first night, which she would leave today for the larger room at the end of the hall that Caleb had told her was hers whenever she was ready, and she thought about her father. She thought about him the way she had learned to think about him over the years since he died. Not with the acute grief of the early months, but with the particular tender clarity of remembering someone you loved well and lost honestly. She thought about the farm in Ohio and the smell of it in September, and the way he had talked about land like it was a living thing that asked something of the people who tended it. She thought about what he would have said, standing in that small room in the Thornton ranch with his daughter on her wedding morning. She thought he would have said, "You are exactly where you're supposed to be." She got up. She put on the dress she had pressed the night before, not the blue wool, which was for courthouses and formal occasions, but a cream-colored dress with small brown buttons that she had made herself the winter before leaving Ohio. Not for any occasion in particular, simply because she had fabric and time, and had wanted to make something careful. She had not known making it that she was making her wedding dress. But it fit the day exactly, which was the kind of thing her father would have called providence, and Eleanor called paying attention. She was pinning her hair when she heard boots in the hallway. A knock at her door. She opened it. Tom Briggs was standing in the hall with his hat in his hands and his good shirt on, the one he wore for occasions that required acknowledgement, even if they did not require words. He looked at her for a moment. "You look fine, Miss Eleanor," he said. "Thank you, Tom," she said. He nodded. He turned to go. "Tom," she said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said again, and she meant it for all of it, for the night he had held the bunkhouse and the morning he had locked the strongbox, and the 48 hours he had stood between the ranch and disaster while she worked at the kitchen table and Caleb rode to Miles City. For the way he had said "yes, ma'am" in the bunkhouse when she told the stranger she had come 2,000 miles and given back an envelope and could manage Gerald Fitch. Tom looked at her for a moment. "He's a good man," Tom said. "He needed someone who'd stand next to him, not behind him, not in front of him." He paused. "Beside him." "I know," she said. Tom nodded again. He went back down the hall. Eleanor closed her door and finished her hair. Caleb was waiting in the main room when she came downstairs. He was dressed with the same careful lack of ceremony that characterized everything he did. Good clothes, but not costume. He looked like himself, which was what she had come to understand was the highest compliment she could give anyone. He turned when he heard her on the stairs. He looked at her. He did not say anything for a moment. "You're wearing the cream dress," he said finally. "I made it myself," she said. "Winter before last." "It's—" He stopped, started again. "You look like exactly who you are," he said. She looked at him. "So do you," she said. He crossed to her and held out his arm, and she took it, and they walked out of the house together. The ceremony took place in front of the ranch house with the valley spread below them, and the mountain country doing what it did in October, blazing and enormous and entirely indifferent in the best possible way. Sheriff Aldrin, who held a Justice of the Peace Commission, in addition to his other duties, conducted it. Tom stood on Caleb's side. Danny stood on Eleanor's because he had asked with such transparent hope that refusing him would have required a hard-heartedness she did not possess. Pike and Reuben and two of the other hands stood at a respectful distance with their hats in their hands. Martha Griggs was there with her husband and her good bonnet. 3 other families from the valley who had known Caleb for years and had quietly revised their opinion of Eleanor over the past months were there as well. It was not a crowd. It was the right number of people for something that was meant to be real. Aldrin kept it brief. The words were the traditional words which Eleanor had always found more beautiful than their familiarity suggested promises made in plain language in front of witnesses, with the understanding that they would need to be kept when keeping them was difficult, as well as when it was easy. When Aldrin asked Caleb if he took Eleanor Whitaker as his wife, Caleb said yes, the way he said all true things without preamble, without performance, with the quiet absolute certainty of a man who has made a decision and will not be revisiting it. When Aldrin asked Eleanor if she took Caleb Thornton as her husband, she said yes the same way. Aldrin said the final words. Caleb took her hand, and then quietly, so that only she could hear it, he said the word she had heard him say once before on a train platform in front of an entire town, stepping out of a crowd to stand beside her when everyone else had already decided she was something to be returned. "Mine," he said, not as ownership. She had understood it then, and she understood it now. Not possession, not transaction. Promise. You are the person I choose. She held his hand. "Mine," she said back. The people around them heard it or didn't hear it, and either way, did not fully understand it, and that was fine. Some things are for the 2 people saying them, and the audience is beside the point. Danny started clapping and then stopped himself because no one else was, and then started again because the moment required something. And he was 20 years old, and this was what 20-year-olds did. and Eleanor turned and laughed, and the sound of it carried out across the valley in the October air. And Caleb looked at her laughing and had the expression of a man who has just confirmed something he already knew. The afternoon that followed was the kind that becomes the thing people mean when they say they had a good day. Not dramatic, not catalogued for strangers, just good. The food was good, the conversation was easy, the people were the right people, and the light over the mountain valley, in the late afternoon of an October Saturday in 1884, was doing something so extraordinary that even people who had lived with it for years stopped periodically to look. Tom did not make a speech. Eleanor had not expected him to, and would have been concerned about his health if he had. Danny made a toast that was sincere and slightly too long, and included a tangent about the pantry organization system that made Eleanor press her lips together to keep from laughing out loud. And when he finished, he sat down with the red-faced relief of someone who has done the brave thing and survived it. Martha Griggs found Eleanor near the end of the afternoon, when the guests were beginning to think about the ride home, and the particular gentle winding down of the occasion had begun. "I've been thinking," Martha said, "about what you said, about doing better." "Yes," Eleanor said. "I think the hardest part," Martha said carefully, "is that it wasn't malicious. What I said at the station, what Agnes and it wasn't cruelty for its own sake. We made our assessment, and we didn't question it. And I'm not sure which is worse, honestly. Cruelty with intention or judgment with none." Eleanor looked at her. "It's a real question," she said. "I don't have a clean answer to it." "No," Martha said. "I don't suppose there is one. But asking it," Eleanor said, "is already different from not asking it. That matters." Martha looked at her with the expression of someone who is learning to accept that grace can be offered without being preceded by sufficient penance, and who is not entirely comfortable with that yet, but is trying. "You're a fair woman, Eleanor Thornton," she said. It was the first time anyone had used that name. Eleanor let it settle. Eleanor Thornton. "Thank you, Martha," she said. The guests left as the light failed. Tom and the hands went to the evening work. Danny disappeared to the kitchen. The yard went quiet. Eleanor and Caleb stood on the porch in the early evening, and neither of them spoke for a while because there are moments in a life that do not require narration, and both of them had the good sense to recognize this as one of them. Then, because it was October and getting cold, Caleb said, "We should go in." "We should," she said. "The kitchen stove in the back left corner still needs seeing to before winter." "I'll get Jensen out next week," he said. "You've been saying that for 6 weeks." "I'll get Jensen out next week," he repeated with the particular emphasis of a man making an actual commitment rather than a conversational one. "All right," she said. They went inside. That night, after the house had gone quiet and the ranch had settled into its evening rhythms, Eleanor sat at the kitchen table with her notebook. Not working, not documenting anything, just sitting the way she sometimes did when the day had been full enough that she needed a few minutes of stillness before sleep. She opened the notebook to the first page of notes she had made the night she had stayed up working through the ledger with the lamp trimmed low, and Caleb had been moving through the house below her, and she had been piecing together the shape of Gerald Fitch's scheme. 3 pages of notes in her careful handwriting. The first line read, "Pattern in supply invoices. Quarterly intervals. April-October. Designed to stay within variance range." She looked at it for a long time. She had come to Montana as a woman with a single suitcase and a belief in the written word and a quiet refusal to be returned like something unwanted. She had come without resources, without connections, without any claim on this place or these people beyond an 8-month correspondence and the decision to stand on a platform and give back an envelope. She had not come to save anyone. She had come because she needed somewhere to belong, and she had made the brave and possibly foolish decision to believe that belonging was something you could build rather than something you either had or didn't. She had been right, not because the story went the way she wanted. Not because the man turned out to be exactly who his letter suggested. Not because the ranch was beautiful and the valley was extraordinary, and the October light was the kind of thing that made a person understand why people chose hard lives in hard country. Not even because of the ring on her finger or the name she had been called today for the first time. Because she had shown up. She had shown up and done the work that was in front of her, and asked the questions that needed asking, and refused once, twice, a dozen times, in a dozen different forms, to accept other people's verdict on her value. That was the whole of it. Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had the look of a man who came downstairs expecting a dark house and found a lamp and was not surprised. "You're not sleeping," he said. "In a minute," she said. He came to the table and sat across from her. He looked at the open notebook. "The first notes," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about the 48 hours, he said. "I know you told me not to, but I keep thinking about them." "Caleb, let me say it," he said. She waited. "I almost let fear make the worst decision of my life," he said. "And I need to say that out loud at least once clearly, because I think it matters that I know it. Not to punish myself. Just I need to know it so that I understand what nearly happened and why it didn't." She looked at him across the table. "Why didn't it?" she said. "Because you gave the envelope back," he said. "Because you stood on that platform with nowhere to go and no money and an entire town watching, and you chose dignity over disappearance." He held her gaze. "I saw that from the back of the crowd, and I thought whatever else I have done wrong in my life, I will not add letting that woman walk away to the list." Eleanor was quiet. "You came through the crowd," she said. "I came through the crowd," he said. "And you stood beside me," she said. "I stood beside you," he said. She closed the notebook. She looked at her husband across the kitchen table in the lamplight of the house that had been built by a man who intended it to be filled, and she felt not the relief of being rescued, because she had never needed rescuing, but the deep particular satisfaction of a woman who chose correctly, and knew it, who built something real in a place that asked hard things of the people who stayed, who had done the work to deserve what she had, and had the notebook to prove it. "Come to bed," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She blew out the lamp. The house went dark and quiet, and outside the Montana night was doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent and beautiful, and inside the Thornton ranch for the first time in longer than anyone had been counting, there was nothing missing. Eleanor Whitaker had come to Montana looking for a place where she belonged, and she had done what she always did with every hard and necessary thing in her life. She had built it herself with both hands, and she had made it